Trevor Sangrey. I finished my dissertation fairly recently. My first shout out is if you're ever struggling with your dissertation, the first place to go is your library. The funny story I have to tell is that my very lovely dissertation advisor was like, no, you can't write about that, when I came at her with my first idea. She's like, you have absolutely no distance. You cannot write about that and be successful. You have to at least start with something else. She's like, go to the library and find something. And so I actually lived off campus, and the library was kind of in the trees. So I didn't go, I just went on ILL. And I started having interlibrary loans send me things, just kind of like haphazardly, which is how I got my dissertation topic. I did not know that the Communist Party had written over 250 pamphlets about race in the 1930s that were really awesome. And the library at Davis, which is part of the UC system, very kindly just sent them to me in the mail. So this is if you're stuck, go to the library and just start randomly requesting things and see what happens. It worked for me, it could work for you. I'm really gonna talk about some practical strategies about writing a dissertation. I found it to be an incredibly mind-numbingly painful process until I figured out how to do it. And then it actually, and this is going to sound really weird because it's not what people normally tell you, it actually was pretty easy. And that might sound really weird, but it wasn't that the intellectual work was easy. It wasn't that I didn't struggle with the ideas or I didn't feel like I was a failure. All of those things were actually pretty true. But that the actual writing part, I found pretty easy. And so there were three things that I think I did, in part based on the work of this woman named Dorothy Brown, who is in California and gives these very intense lectures on how you should write your dissertation. And I followed some of those strategies and found they worked for me really well. So one of them is, I know that you're also humanities folks. I come from a very, very non-quantitative program. And one of the first things that worked for me really well was quantifying everything I did, which meant I said I was going to work for this amount of time, and that's what time I worked for. And I was going to get these 4 things done, and that's what I did. And if I did those things, I was good, and I felt good about myself. And this is where it became easy, because I set myself little tiny bits to do, and then if I did them, I didn't feel like a sobbing failure. So that would be one of my best suggestions, is set yourself small goals and goals that you can manage. Dorothy Brown swears by 45 minutes. You must work for 45 minutes, and then I don't care if you're mid-sentence, you can be mid-word, but you stop and you take a break. California, you're supposed to go outside. If it's winter here, I wouldn't go outside, I'd just kind of walk around in a circle. But that was a really great trick for me. I'm a sucker for a blank page. I do not like being at the beginning. I hate the morning when I'm starting to write. I have all of these things I have to write. All of that made me feel really stuck. I could totally make myself do 45 minutes. No problem. I can do 45 minutes. I can do 45 minutes, and then I'm going to watch 3 episodes of Bones, which is what was my guilty pleasure. Bones is horrible. Like, it's just not a good show. But it's so formulaic, you know exactly what's going to happen. It was so comforting. So I say also pick a really boring TV show. So I could do 45 minutes and then do something else. And by the time I got that 45 minutes done, I knew what I was going to do for my next 45 minutes, and it felt good. So quantify, make little things that you're going to do. I'm a lister. I make these epic lists. But my lists include things like put page numbers on syllabus. Check. And then I could do those things and felt successful. So that was one of my tricks. It also is time management, right? You have an idea of what you're doing every day. I'm a pretty firm believer in taking a day off. I took a day off every week. And I also usually only did the units. My units always weren't exactly 45 minutes, I'm a failure. But I usually did 2 to 4, which meant that really I was working like about 4 hours. And I did other things the rest of my day. But because those 4 hours were really productive, I finished my dissertation in a fairly short amount of time. I also didn't know anyone because I just moved to St. Louis, but that's That's a different talk. The second thing that I found really helpful was thinking about my project as a whole. So often you write your dissertation in pieces, and you maybe you started a chapter that was this really, great essay that you wrote for a great professor for this class. And you're like, I know that that's going to be something that's going to go here, and I'm going to do this with it, blah, 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 blah. And so you have pieces of the larger project. Does that make sense? Like everyone, imagine they might have, even if it's like 3 pages that I wrote once, that's going to become this other thing. Put that together as a whole. So you're writing a dissertation, particularly in the humanities, we often conceptualize that as somewhat like a book. I suggest getting a binder and labeling it dissertation, or whatever your dissertation is titled, and putting everything in there as if it was finished. Make a table of contents, make chapters, and put the pieces in there where they go. I went whole hog. Like I decided my dissertation, I actually have my notes here from when I was doing this. My dissertation was going to be 437 pages. It wasn't. It was pretty darn close, but that's before I'd written really any of it. I was like 437 pages. I put 437 pages in this binder, and I kind of split them up by chapters. I guessed how many chapters I was going to have. I put a table of contents, and then the writing bits that I had, I filled them in. I actually just reprinted them on the pages that had 3 holes in them and put them in the binder. What this did for me, and why I think it worked, is it meant that I thought about the project as a whole. And whenever I started a unit, I was like, oh, well, I have little things that I can do that I know where they fit. I know that it'll be doing something for the larger project. And it forced me to make decisions even if I didn't have all the information I needed to do it right. Which meant that I was making decisions, which I think is where a lot of people get stuck. So I think that that's a really great strategy. I had a separate binder that had all my notes, that had all of my discussions with my advisors, and all of that stuff was in a different binder. This was the binder that was my dissertation. I could have brought it for you. Like, by the end, I'd swap out places, I would tape and cut things apart and tape them in where they were gonna belong. But because it was all together, it meant I had an idea of where I was going. I called it the table of contents. It wasn't an outline, it was a table of contents. And that worked really well for me to put the whole project together. It became a project rather than me and a sea of paperwork. So I thought that was a good one. And then the final thing is I really like mind mapping. I call them my pictures. I drew pictures of my dissertation chapters, and I would then tape them on the wall. So the room that I worked in had all of these pictures that were pictorial representations of the arguments, in part because I could add to them easier than I could an outline. That outlines felt very boxy, like I had to do all of these things in this order, and that if I did it in a different order, I had to go back and change my outline. I spent weeks rewriting outlines, which actually doesn't get you any closer to writing your dissertation. But if I had a picture, I had lots of funny colored paper, I got out the colored pencils. If I had a picture, it was something that I could change, and I could draw a new arrow, I could cross something out, and that worked really well for me. So those would be the three things I think that I did that made writing a dissertation actually okay. I worked in little bits of time. I thought about my project as a whole. I made a binder. It was called Dissertation. I carried it around with me everywhere for a while. It was kind of fun. And I made pictures of my arguments rather than only thinking in linear outlines.